The Nintendo Entertainment System just turned 34 in North America, and to celebrate this, a lot of people made videos on the NES looking back at a retrospective of it, and I thought that was a cool idea, but I kind of wanted to do something a bit different. Since Nintendo has been in North America for now 34 plus years, I thought it would be fun to take a look at all of the Nintendo home consoles that we've gotten, and basically rank them, see which ones are the best, see which ones are the worst, and why I feel that they should go into those tiers. So that's what we're going to do today on the channel. From the cream of the crop of the Nintendo systems to the D tier of the Nintendo systems. We're going to go over every Nintendo system, and I'm going to tell you guys where this system ranks. So sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's rank the Nintendo home consoles. So we're going to do this in chronological order from the way that these systems were released. So kicking things off, we are going to start out with the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. And you would think to yourself, that would be an easy one to put in the cream of the crop. But am I going to put it in the cream of the crop? I mean, yeah, I am. It's going in the cream of the crop. The NES pretty much saved the North American video game industry. Now, you can make a case that it didn't have as big of an impact in countries like Europe. I know my buddy Top Hat Gaming Man has made videos on this subject. The Sega Master System was very popular in Europe as opposed to the Nintendo Entertainment System, so you could definitely make a case in those regions that maybe it wasn't as impactful, but in North America it was a huge deal. People got Nintendo fever. Nintendo was all over the place. There's a reason why your mom calls all video game consoles a Nintendo, and it's because of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, as far as the positives of the system are concerned, you had so many amazing games on this system. You got the introduction to franchises that are now staples like Mario, Zelda, Metroid. Nintendo really went all out with these IPs and made fun and innovative games that you couldn't really get on other platforms. Of course, there was very strong third-party support as well on this system. No matter what genre of game you were looking for, you could play it on the NES. You had great Japanese RPGs which were starting to become a thing, like Final Fantasy and the Dragon Warrior series. You had so many iconic arcade ports that of course were a bit dumbed down, but still gave you the same sort of satisfaction that you got in the arcade. Games like Double Dragon, Ninja Gaiden, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles games. There were so many awesome games for the NES, and truly a system for everyone. You got the introduction to more quality sports games. Sports games up until this time were just sort of players on a field. You didn't have any real identities. But on the NES, you had franchises like RBI Baseball, Tecmo Bowl, and of course Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, which really made sports games a household name. As far as negatives are concerned about the NES, I feel that Nintendo maybe got a bit complacent with the NES, especially towards the latter half of the system's life cycle. You never saw any cool things like you saw in Japan, like the Famicom Disk System with the NES, and I think that could have been something really cool and maybe have prolonged the life of the system a bit longer. Another thing that I didn't really like with the NES was just the third-party licensing things that you had with this system. You could only release a certain amount of games, so companies like Konami had to make subsidiaries like Ultra in order to get around that. And of course, Nintendo themselves had a stranglehold on a lot of North American third-party games, where you couldn't put them on other systems like the Sega Master System. And that's why the Sega Master System kind of took off a bit more in Europe, because you had a stronger system that was able to do these third-party games that Nintendo wasn't allowing. But all in all, the NES is a fantastic system, definitely a cream of the crop system.
Cream of the crop!
And one of the best systems of all time. Following that up, we have the Super Nintendo. And yes, the Super Nintendo, I mean, come on, people, that's cream of the crop.
Cream of the crop!
You took the base of the NES, you took what the NES brought to the table, and then you just went absolutely crazy with this system. And it's funny for me to say this because I did not grow up with the Super Nintendo. I grew up with the Sega Genesis. So really, I play more Sega Genesis stuff than I do Super Nintendo stuff. But the Super Nintendo was absolutely amazing. The key franchises that you were introduced to on the NES, like Mario, Zelda, and Metroid, were of course brought over to the Super Nintendo, and these games were tenfold bigger than their predecessors. You know, you had stronger graphics, you had deeper storylines, you had more things to do and more things to see in these games. You had the introduction of new franchises like Donkey Kong Country. You had F-Zero on this system. You had some of the strongest JRPGs of all time on this system, as Squaresoft was definitely supporting the Super Nintendo way over something like the Sega Genesis. You had the Final Fantasy games. You had Chrono Trigger. You had Secret of Mana. Just so many awesome games on this system, and really a system for everyone. You had top-tier sports games. You had fighting games, which were a genre that couldn't really be done on the 8-bit systems, come over to the Super Nintendo, and you had so many awesome ones. You had Street Fighter games, you had Mortal Kombat, you had Primal Rage, you had Killer Instinct. Truly a system for everyone. You had a more refined controller with a better layout and more buttons to be able to do things. You had Nintendo trying interesting things like, of course, the Super FX chip, which allowed for polygons and 3D rendered games such as Doom and Star Fox to be done on the Super Nintendo. As far as any negative complaints about the Super Nintendo are concerned, really the only one I can think of is I would have loved to have seen the CD attachment done by Sony for the Super Nintendo. I think that really would have opened some doors, and it would have completely changed the video game landscape. It would have made the video game landscape in 2019 very, very different than what you're seeing right now if Sony had partnered up with Nintendo as originally intended. But other than that, the Super Nintendo is just a god tier system, arguably one of the best, if not the best systems of all time, and definitely a cream of the crop.
Cream of the crop.
Next up, we have the Virtual Boy, and the Virtual Boy has to be a D system. As far as positives are concerned with the system, even though there was only 13 games on the system, there were some pretty good games on this system. Games like Wario Land, Mario Clash, Telero Boxer, and of course Mario Tennis were very fun games, and really only games that could sort of be done on the system like this. I thought the controller was pretty neat as well. It was an innovative controller, it had multiple D-pads on it, definitely a very comfortable controller. But other than that, this system absolutely sucked, and I say that as someone who loved the Virtual Boy. I own 2 Virtual Boys now. I actually chose a Virtual Boy over a Sega Saturn and a PlayStation 1 one Christmas because I guess I was just an idiot kid. But like I said, this system only had 13 games. It was doomed from the start. It wasn't really a 3D system. It was more of a system that could do things like polygons that were supposed to be impressive on this system with the headset of the system, but because everything was just in red and black, it just didn't really look all that great. It did cause people some headaches and eye strains. Me personally, I never had any problem with this, but I think the main problem with the Virtual Boy was a lack of identity. Was this a home console that you just couldn't hook up to your television? Was it a portable console that was just too clunky to bring with you? The battery life when you would use AA batteries on this thing was absolutely atrocious. So just a failure of a system, a really strange system as well, but yeah, definitely the worst system Nintendo has ever done. Next up, we have the N64, and the N64 is kind of a tough one because I feel like it could go in a B, but I'm actually going to put it in a C, and I will tell you guys why. Now, the positives of the N64 were, of course, the game library from Nintendo themselves. There are some absolutely amazing first-party games on this system. Games like Super Mario 64 really reinvented the 3D platformer and made the 3D platformer a household name. It's still a game that I absolutely love to this day and one of my favorite games of all time. You also had The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask, 2 of the most heralded Zelda games of all time. I personally prefer Ocarina of Time over Majora's Mask, but still, definitely 2 great games in Nintendo's library of games. You had Nintendo really trying to emphasize different things on this system and make this a real party system. You had very strong graphics on here as well, with games like GoldenEye 64 that could only be done on the Nintendo 64. The N64 was stronger than the other consoles on the market, so you got a lot more 3D experiences on this console than on something like the PlayStation 1 or the Sega Saturn at the time. So the N64 had a lot of positive things. There were so many awesome first-party and console-exclusive games on this system that it really made it stand out. So why would this be a C-tier console? Well, you have to look at the video game landscape of that time and look at some of the problems of the N64. The N64, of course, with a cartridge-based medium, and because of this cartridge-based medium, the games themselves were very expensive. With games like Wayne Gretzky were $79.99 at launch of the N64, it's like, this is an arcade game. Why the hell is this $80? But that's because of the cartridge medium. Because of the cartridge medium that they went with, a lot of third-party developers didn't want to put their games on the N64 because CD-based technology was a lot cheaper. So you did not see as many third-party games on the N64 as you did on something like the PlayStation 1 or the Sega Saturn. Fighting games were pretty much gone. There were some 3D fighting games on the system, but as far as 2D fighters were concerned, you had none of them. JRPGs, what JRPGs were on this system? Really, from the Japanese perspective, games like Mischief Maker and Ogre Battle 64 are really the only 2 games that spring to mind that would have a heavy emphasis on the Japanese market. Squaresoft abandoned Nintendo and went over to the PlayStation 1 and created some of the best PlayStation 1 RPGs of all time and some of the greatest RPGs of all time. And I feel like that really hurt the Nintendo 64. The price of the cartridges, the weirdness of the controller, while it did work, it was definitely a bit clunky. So I feel like those things have to make the N64 a C-tier system. It had a lot of potential. I think it could have been a great system, but Nintendo's decisions to go with a cartridge-based medium, I feel definitely hurt them in the long run. Next up, we have the Nintendo GameCube, a really fun system. No, you're not going in the D tier, get out of there. B or A, I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the B tier. Now, I absolutely love the GameCube. I thought the GameCube was a very great system, but there's definitely one reason why I'm not going to put it in the A tier or above, and we will get to that. But as far as positives are concerned with the GameCube, I think Nintendo did a really good job with this system. You, of course, had stellar first-party titles, whether you're talking about games like Luigi's Mansion, The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, Super Mario Sunshine, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I know a lot of people love that game, and of course the Metroid Prime series. The Metroid Prime series was born on the Nintendo GameCube, and those games still hold up today. It's amazing to see those games running on something like a GC HD adapter because they look so gorgeous, and that's really because of the disc-based medium. Nintendo was able to do more things with their games, and that allowed third-party support as well. I don't think third-party support was quite as good as it was on the PS2 and the Xbox, but still, the GameCube got a lot of third-party games, which I think definitely helped them. So then why is the GameCube only in the B tier if there's so many positive things for it? I think the main problem with the GameCube is when you look at the video game landscape at that time, the home console market, each home console had its own sort of thing. It had its own sort of identity. When you look at the original Xbox, what was the original Xbox known? It was known for Xbox Live and being able to play games online. When you look at the PlayStation 2, aside from a huge variety of games, tons of third-party exclusives, the PlayStation 2 was also known as one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, DVD players out on the market, whereas the Nintendo GameCube was strictly a video game console. I feel like if the Nintendo GameCube had something like that, a strong online infrastructure, or even the ability to play DVDs, I think the Nintendo GameCube could have been a real contender in that console generation. That's not to say the GameCube sold poorly or anything like that, but I think the GameCube could have been a much bigger success if it had some sort of concrete identity besides just a video game console. So because of that, I'm going to put the GameCube in the B category. Next up, we have the Nintendo Wii, and I'm going to put the Nintendo Wii also in the B category, and I'll explain to you guys why. I really like the Nintendo Wii. I think the Nintendo Wii is one of the most underrated systems of all time when you really look at the general landscape of systems. When it comes to, how video games were going at that time, everyone was moving into the HD era, and the Nintendo Wii was like the polar opposite of that. But I feel like that really helped Nintendo in the long run, as the Nintendo Wii was very successful for Nintendo. You still had those great first-party games. You had games like Super Mario Galaxy, Metroid Prime Corruption, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Just a fantastic system from a first-party standpoint. You, of course, had the middleware sort of party games for this system as well. Your Wii Fit, that was obviously a cultural phenomenon. This system, though, really helped bring Nintendo back into the limelight when it came to video games. Everyone was talking about Nintendo again because of the simplicity of the Wiimote of controllers and the ability to do things like motion controls. You also had some decent third-party efforts on the system as well. Definitely not as many as you saw on other systems, but there were some ports on there. There were some games that were definitely standout titles in the third-party marketplace when it came to the Nintendo Wii. Games like Silent Hill, Shattered Memories, I thought was really good. You just didn't have those big blockbuster games, those big blockbuster third-party games that were coming to other consoles. You had first-person shooters, though. There was a ton of Call of Duties on there. You had some interesting first-party exclusives like the Conduit series. Just a really good system. It also brought in the Wii Shop channel, which had a ton of great software on it as well. Just a fantastic system. The main problem with the Nintendo Wii, though, was just the amount of shovelware that was thrown out onto this system. You had companies that were known companies, that were big companies, that were trying to put games on this system, bigger third-party titles, and they weren't really selling, but then they would just throw together like some Carnival games or something like that, and those games were selling exponentially well. So a lot of developers got really lazy with the Nintendo Wii, and I can definitely understand why. These party-style games were the games that were selling on the Wii, whereas the more hardcore experiences were not. I think the Nintendo Wii is a fantastic system for what it is, but I feel like if Nintendo would have put a little bit more power into it, it could have been something even better. Next up, we have the Wii U, and I'm going to put the Wii U in the C category right next to the N64 because it is a very similar story. You had the first-party games on the Nintendo Wii U, but that was really all you had on the Nintendo Wii U. And it's really a shame that the Wii U suffered the fate that it did, because I think the Wii U was, from a technical standpoint, a very fun system. It was something different. It was something that was very unique. But of course, there were just so many issues with the Nintendo Wii U that held it back. Of course, when you look at the first-party third-party lineup of Nintendo games, there were some definitely very stellar titles on this system, but you really didn't see the games that maybe you necessarily wanted to see. You saw things like ports of other Zelda games brought over to the system, but of course Breath of the Wild didn't come out until the tail end of the life cycle. There was no Metroid, there was no 3D Mario game. You had Super Mario 3D World, sure, which was a fantastic game, but you still didn't have a lot of great first-party Nintendo games like you saw on other systems. You definitely had some, but I feel like it was a bit limited in terms of what this system was able to do. Third-party companies completely abandoned the Nintendo Wii U as well. There was a big influx of third-party games at the start of the system, and then 6 months later, all these third-party companies were like, bye, we're not putting our games on your system anymore. And it's a shame because I think a lot of the early third-party ports for the Nintendo Wii U are some of the best versions of the game. Look at a game like Batman Arkham City Armored Edition on the Nintendo Wii U. That's my favorite version of the game to play because I like what they did with the gamepad of this system. And I like the gamepad. I thought the idea of itself of the gamepad was very interesting. It was very unique. It was just the execution. And that's really what the Nintendo Wii U boils down to in terms of its ranking, is the execution of everything. The name, the Wii U, was very confusing for the marketplace. People didn't know if this was an attachment for the Wii or a whole new console. Can my Wii U games work on my Wii? Just a terrible marketing decision and a real lack of marketing with this system as well. Nintendo dropped the ball with the Nintendo Wii U, and it really caused a lot of people to think that Nintendo was going to bow out of the console war. Definitely one of the weakest systems from a complete standpoint, a very low number of games as well. I would actually put the N64 slightly above the Nintendo Wii U in the terms of how these systems are, and I say that as someone that absolutely loves the Wii U and the library of games, but when you look at the bigger picture, the Wii U definitely had a ton of problems. And the final Nintendo system is the Nintendo Switch, and I'm going to put it in the A category, the only game system for Nintendo in the A category, and I think it has potential to go into the S category, but we'll get to that in just a moment. The Nintendo Switch, though, much like the Nintendo Wii, has pretty much saved Nintendo's ass once again. The Nintendo Switch is probably what the Nintendo Wii U was intended to be, both a home and a portable home console. The first-party lineup of games on the Nintendo Switch has been absolutely amazing. Games like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Super Mario Odyssey, the list goes on and on. There's so many awesome games still coming out for the Nintendo Switch as well. Nintendo really did a great job marketing the system as well, being a system for everyone, whether you're a kid or an adult, someone who travels around a lot, who has to take public transportation or something like that, or just someone who likes to be able to play games in a handheld mode. It really bridged the gap between the handheld and the home console system better than I think any other system could have done. Third-party support is even back on the Nintendo Switch. You're not getting every single game on here, but you're getting tons of high-quality AAA titles. Games like Skyrim, The Outer Worlds, Mortal Kombat 11, all are available on the Nintendo Switch. You, of course, just recently had The Witcher 3, Doom Eternal is coming out on the system, Wolfenstein is back. It's definitely been a revitalization for Nintendo, and a fantastic system. I love the controllers of the system. I love the system variants that we've gotten so far, such as the Nintendo Switch Lite. It's been just an absolute home run for Nintendo. So if the system is so good, if there's so many great games ranging from indie titles to big AAA titles, why is the Nintendo Switch not in the cream of the crop tier? Strictly because of this one thing. I think Nintendo is taking the online features of the Nintendo Switch way too lightly. When you look at something like the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, these systems have deep online features. When you look at the Nintendo Switch, it's very, very bare bones. It's so bare bones, you don't even have simple applications on the Nintendo Switch like a web browser or Netflix, and it's just like, why are these things not on the system? That makes absolutely no sense to me. Yes, you could do things like Netflix and Facebook and web browsers on your cell phone, but wouldn't it be nice to do it on all just one device? Why is there still not a party chat system on here? We're paying for Nintendo Switch Online, yet we're not getting basic features that were available on the original Xbox. I really feel like the Nintendo Switch's Online is the one thing that's holding the Nintendo Switch back from being a cream of the crop system. If Nintendo can come around on this online system, I think the Nintendo Switch will be a cream of the crop system and arguably one of the best Nintendo consoles of all time because of the versatility of it and the great game library, but the online features are definitely holding it back a bit. Alright, so that is my ranking of all of the Nintendo home consoles from the NES to the Nintendo Switch. So let me know in the comments section down below what you think of my rankings. Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? And how would you rank the systems? And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to slap a like on it and let me know in the comments section down below. I'm thinking about doing a handheld version of this where we look at Nintendo handhelds or maybe just handhelds in general, and I'll rank those. So if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to let me know you enjoyed it so that we can do more ranking videos in the future. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.